I don't know where you want to start with this. It's not surprising news. Stewie, in fact, have been waiting a couple days on this front. The hammer drops today. But your initial thoughts on Sheldon Keefe being fired?
What's the saying in Avengers? I am inevitable. So I think this was something that was inevitable, right? Just based on the National Hockey League being a results-based business. And I think he's done a pretty good job, managing the group. Remember, this team has many superstars, many different egos that you have to deal with on a daily basis. And I think on a regular season, I think he did probably an A-plus job. But this group was brought together. All these players were paid a lot of money ultimately to be competitors in the Stanley Cup, for the Stanley Cup, and they just have not gotten over the hump. So, I go back to my days as a player where I was playing in the dreaded Southeast Division, where we rarely made the playoffs. There was change every single year. I believe in Florida, I went through 2 GMs, 3 coaches, and that was with zero expectations. So in a market where you're expected to win or get close to winning, there's going to be, consequences for the lack of success. So I believe this is probably going to be the first shoe to drop on many that's going to happen with this Toronto Maple Leafs team, because we've been going back in the media now together, you and I, Nick, for probably about 4 years now. And we kept talking about, is this the year? If it doesn't happen this year, what's going to happen? So for a group now that's been expecting changes for the last 2 years at a minimum, I think there's going to be some major changes with this group, especially with the management structure based on some new people coming in.
Man, that's 18 head coaching changes since the start of last season. To your point, I think the head coach is the easiest scapegoat. It would have been the definition of insanity to come back and say, hey, Sheldon Keefe's our guy after another playoff disappointment. He had 5 seasons. He won 1 playoff series. I mean, it goes harder than that, longer than that, obviously, with Brendan Shanahan in charge for the last decade. But the writing was on the wall. If you heard from Sheldon Keefe following Game 7, locker room clean out day as well. I think he knew that his time was over as the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I think my lasting memory is that Sheldon Keefe was a really, really good coach, especially and specifically in the regular season. Just couldn't get the job done in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And Stewie, as good as anybody else, it is a results-oriented business, right?
Yeah, and I just like to touch on him on the personal side, right? And this is a person that I've seen around the hockey rinks all over Toronto, taking time out of his day to sign autographs and talk. So for him, the person, upstanding citizen and role model in the community, and that's a big, big part of it. Where I'm sure some of the players are going to be really, really, disappointed, because he's a good person. He's a good person. Everyone has great things to say about him and who he is as a person. But again, on the business side, you just have to make changes. We've been talking about run it back. And I feel like I'm crazy. Like, is this how the media really works? Like, we've been talking about this for how many years? So, as far as, who can be coming in, I think they need a coach that can maybe probably adapt a little bit to coaching plans on the fly, not readjust maybe after a game or after you're done 3-1. You have to have that accountability. So for me, I would not want that job. How do you keep $40 million in forwards accountable on a nightly basis, especially in playoffs? That's very, very tough, a task that I would not want. So I think you're going to need that strong personality type. And they've had that in coaches in past. So for me, I expect there's probably going to be some roster changes as well, and get a little bit more of a different identity with this group, because right, wrong, or indifferent, this mix of current roster and players just have not got it done in the playoffs. So you have to find a way to switch things up if your goal is to win the Stanley Cup. And I've questioned that. I questioned that on a big major network before, and they say, you can't say that. Does it really matter for the bottom line if they win or lose? There's people that are waiting to die. But when the Stanley Cup is won by the Toronto Maple Leafs, there's a business in them losing right now. But ultimately, yes, you want to win the Stanley Cup. I know they want to do it, but with this current group, I just think they're not there, and they're not good enough at this point.
Stu, is this more a story about Sheldon Keefe not being good enough to do the job and get them over the top? Is this more a story about not being able to fire an entire hockey team, do you think?
Probably a combination of both. And I think as a coach, it's your responsibility to know your team and get the most out of them. Right. So I think for me, there's a couple players that were stuck in neutral, at the end of the season going into playoffs. And that's the coach's responsibility. Yes, as a player, you have to get up and get going and have energy and have speed and all that. But from an execution of the game plan, I just think it wasn't there. And you look at that Boston Bruins team, yeah, they're a great team, but from a depth department, they could have taken advantage and have exposed that depth. They could have exposed Swayman by getting to the net, taking away his time and space. So from an execution of the game plan, I don't think it was right there until they were down 3-1. And you know how tough of a hill that's to climb. So the fact that they were in that position, some of that is personnel, but some of that is on coaching. But it's playoffs is a totally different animal. And, you know, I played with some great players that were great regular season players. But I played with an Eric Stahl where come playoff time, he was a different beast, a different animal. You couldn't talk to him. You couldn't even go around him if you weren't ready to work or talk about business. You couldn't be messing around in the dressing room. So I think that playoffs, I think they learned a lesson again, I guess. But for next year, I think they just need a different mix of players, bringing in guys that have been there consistently to change the culture. I think they need a culture shift with this group.
Make sure to check out more of our content right here on the Leafs Nation YouTube page. We got long form interviews, we got clips, we got epic rants by Jay Rosa. We simply have it all. And don't forget, you can find out much more at theleafsnation.com. Thanks so much for watching.